So we just have bear video all day, every day. And some of them are really funny and a lot of them are really cute. But like, I feel like it's kind of not, it's sort of off topic for the people who follow me on Twitter. So it seems kind of rude to bombard everybody with bear videos.
I like it. I think it's great. You have like Bear Highway. You have the I-5 right there for bears.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am super happy and privileged to be with James Douma yet again. It's been a little while since we've been together. James, if you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, is an AI expert, software developer, huge Tesla bull. I don't know, you break down all the Tesla stuff. And of course, you are a bear cam owner, so you get to like watch all the bears go by in the back of your house. So if you don't follow James on Twitter, check out the link in the description. I think it's just Jimmo, right? On Twitter.
Yeah, James Douma, I think is the handle. So.
Oh, right. The name is Jimmo, but the handle is James Douma. So yeah. Anyway, I'll put a link in the description. That'll make it easier. Anyway, welcome back. Thank you so much. We have a ton to talk about because the world of AI has gone completely crazy. But first, I just want to talk about Tesla for a few minutes and their full self-driving beta and where you think they are right now. Let's just start with the question of when is technically, forget about the legislation and all that stuff, when do you think that technically they're going to hit the mark where it will be above average driver, no questions asked all the time? Or 99% of the time, 99.9%.
Yeah. Okay. So there's kind of a domain thing because right now FSD is human plus FSD, and that's how we measure it. And then it's not really a human out of the loop system today. I mean, there are other things it would have if they were seriously trying to do that. They're still building foundations for this thing. I mean, we're getting closer by steps, but it doesn't, it's nowhere near good enough at parking lots. It can't park itself. There's all kinds of things that it just fundamentally is lacking right now. So like my sense of the project is they're working on the fundamental tech. That said, the 11 was a really nice step up from 10.69. 10.69 was a really nice step up from the previous dot revs of 10, and 10 was a great step up from 9. I think we're just I was thinking of this metaphor for talking about this development and why it kind of feels weird, the way that it looks from the outside, which is like, if you've ever watched them build a skyscraper, which I used to spend a lot of time in downtown San Francisco. So I got to see a lot of skyscrapers, and I'd walk by in the morning, and for the first 2 years that they're building a skyscraper, all you see is rocks move from one side of the lot to the other and the equipment moves around. It seems like nothing happens at all, even though there are tons of guys there. And then at some point they're done with the foundation, and then they start working on the lattice work. And it seems like, in the blink of an eye, the whole lattice work is there. Like all of a sudden there's a ton of stuff, and it seemed like nothing happened. And in a really short span of time, it seems like a lot of things happen because they're building on this stuff that they spend a lot of time building. But then there's like the tail end of the thing, like from the time that the building kind of looks like it's done until the first guy moves in, the first tenant, that's like a year. And then they're still like gradually adding tenants because there's all this interior work and stuff too. I mean, there's this visible part kind of in the middle, which seems to happen really fast. And that's actually not a bad metaphor for what the public is going to see with FSD, right? For a long time, it's going to, it seems like not a lot is happening because most of the work is happening, in stuff that you can't see very well, walking by on the sidewalk. And then there's going to be this middle section where it's going to seem like, man, things get so much better if you're just talking about features and that kind of stuff. And then there's going to be this long tail at the end where they're gradually, they're drywalling all the individual things. And you'll have, the first couple of tenants, the first couple of applications you can really use it for, like those things will happen, but it'll still be a while before, the building's completely full and like all the stuff is there. Right. So I feel like on FSD, we've kind of just hit that point where they've started doing the framing. And so like externally, we're going to see a lot of stuff happen really quickly. It's going to feel like a lot of progress. But it's not like it's just going to get faster and faster and boom, you're going to be done. There's going to be this point when it just suddenly finishes. There's going to be this long tail of things that they want to add. They're going to keep dialing up the performance. They're going to make it work in snow. They're going to, they're going to be all of these like less critical use cases that are going to take time to flesh out. And so, we're going to see it develop for years. It's going to be going for years and years. And there'll be a hardware 5, hardware 6, and the safety will get higher and higher and higher. But so like at what point, I just was having an exchange with somebody on Twitter about this. I think an interesting benchmark is like, at what point does Tesla take the liability for the accident if the driver's not paying attention? So that's probably when you move into a regime where you as a driver don't get to override. Right now, you get to override the car. You can tell to go at an intersection when it's driving slow. You can tell to change lanes and that kind of stuff. So it may be that Tesla has to go to a regime where, like, as a driver, you hand over control and then you don't get any input. And then they take liability at that point. Like, so when could that happen? And I feel like enough foundation and basic scaffolding will be in place that, like, my 50-50, 50% probability is like second half 2024 kind of time frame. Like, it could happen this year. Like, I figured give that maybe a 25% chance. And then 25 has some probability, 26 has some probability, because that's going to depend on whether, what things show up. There are a lot of problems that you don't know about them until you get to where they pop up. And if it's the kind of problem where, you add a couple of modules to deal with it, like, it's a use case or corner case or something like that, that's one thing. But then, if you get there and you realize, oh no, we need to add another 0 to our accuracy on, on some critical thing, well, that might be back to the drawing board, in the sense that you're going to have to make some big changes to the perception system. Like, those things are still possible. We won't rule them out almost until you get there. It's going to be one of these show me kind of things in certain respects. Yeah. But yeah, I'm super happy with the progress that we've seen. Like, I feel like 11 was a really nice step up from 10. And I think 11 was kind of the point where, like, I can see it now. Like, I feel like I can see, driverless, on the horizon, which like in 10, I really wasn't quite there yet.
No. And I guess I agree with you. I think I agree with you on the timeline more or less too. So you're saying about 1 year to 18 months from now. And I like that sort of metric of when Tesla will say, we will be liable. And maybe it's only when it's nice weather outside, and certain conditions. But if they would take liability ever, that's a huge step forward, because that basically means we think we're eating our own dog food. Isn't that the metaphor they always use? But they're like, this is good enough that we don't think it's going to get in an accident, so we're willing to take the risk.
Or we're willing to eat it when the accident occurs. Yeah. Right. No, I think that, I feel like that's a great, and then, interesting observation. Once again, some investors are not going to like that trade-off and other investors will be much more, sort of aggressive with respect to that. Elon's probably at the aggressive end. He would probably rather start taking liability sooner, because it puts pressure on the company to crank up performance. It puts pressure on the team. Like, it just accelerates things when you make a commitment and you're on the line for.
I think what you said earlier is actually a very good point, is that, and I forget that sometimes it's FSD plus human right now. And there's a little bit of, unless I'm doing one of those drives where I'm actually like videoing it and trying very hard not to intervene, I just do when it's convenient. It's like, it's going a little slow right now. I'll kick in the accelerator and go a little faster, or I'll get in this other lane. So there's this sort of like hybrid driving that's going on right now. And it does become slightly difficult to separate out exactly how well would this do if you were going to drive at 100 miles a day through various types of traffic mix. Like, where would be the places where you'd have that cruise or Waymo thing that happens sometimes, where the car just like goes and it just, stops in the middle of the road and it's just sitting there and they have to rescue it or something. So, and that's bound to happen at some point with Tesla once you take the driver out of it.
That's just, it's the public sort of failures of, and I'm not bashing on Cruise and Waymo. Right. These are unavoidable. Like, as you develop the technology, there's going to be this long period of time when some people are happy with it and some people are not. And, opinion, you're just going to have, and as you work your way along that line, more and more people get happy. But in the middle, you're going to have some behaviors that some people aren't going to like. Right. It's going to be a moving thing. And so Cruise and Waymo are kind of in that place right now. Construction workers in San Francisco are not super happy with them. Right. But the passengers love it. Right. It's like people I hear that use the services think it's great. I mean, it's slow, but it's conservative and it's kind of amazing. And, it's just it's a comfortable experience to be able to use those systems now.
Have you had a chance to ride in one of them?
I have not.
Yeah.
I haven't been in San Francisco enough, and that's the only place I ever go where those guys are operating right now.
Are they, because I'm going to Shareholders Day next week, by the way, got the ticket. Yay. But I believe that they are rolling out, it's either Waymo or Cruise that's rolling out in Austin, right? So I'm not positive if they have it working yet, but if they do, I'll try to get a ride.
They both have plans. And I think Cruise has said like they have a date for when they're going to start.
Okay. So they haven't started yet though. Okay.
I don't think so. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I'll do a little research, because if they do, I would totally love to go ride in one and just experience it.
Yeah, you have to get on a wait list to get. That's one of the things. Like every time I go to San Francisco, I'm like, I forgot to get on the wait list.
Right.
I really wanted to, because if I could get access to a cruise car, I just have it drive me around for 4 hours. Right. Just trying. I think it would be great. I'd love to see like how they're doing. And San Francisco is hard. Like I drive there all the time, and it is. Like as US cities go, it is really next level in terms of like just crazy, because the road system is utterly inadequate to both the parking, the mass transit requirements, the delivery requirements. Like large trucks do deliveries to grocery stores. They just stop in the middle of the street and unload because there's no loading dock. And so you can be driving down down near Van Ness Street, and you're just like dodging delivery. Like every 50 feet there's another block, lane blocked, and you're just weaving in and out of these. And there will be people on the street, and when you have all these trucks parked, people feel really comfortable with just walking right. The pedestrian jaywalker situation is crazy, and you have the homeless thing. There's frequently all kind of crazy things in the street in San Francisco. like training your object system to like identify that kind of stuff. And
let's not forget, it's also ridiculously hilly too, so that you have limited visibility a lot of times. So you're coming over hills, and you don't see what's coming up, and then all of a sudden there's a truck there. So as
American cities go, it's a relatively old city downtown, and the road system is just nuts there, and there's no parking, and it's and everybody has a car on the west side of the city. Like there are lots of cars, no streets, and no parking. Right. So yeah, it's a really tough environment. And Waymo started someplace else. Cruise started in San Francisco, and part of their theory was like, well, if it works here, it'll work anywhere, right? Exactly. Which I think that was a little bit of marketing initially, because they started there because that's where their founders were. That's where it was easy to recruit people to work at the company. Like that made sense. And Google's a big company. They can do, or originally it was Google, and then Waymo kind of spun out from that. But they had a lot more resources to go to a lot of different places, and so they started. They did a different approach, which is let's start with something really easy. Chandler, Arizona, right? It doesn't get any easier than that. Yeah. And
if people don't know, it's basically like a giant grid. Like everything's straight, everything's flat.
Roads are super wide. Nobody's parked on the street. The intersections, it's really flat. So you come to an intersection, you can see in every direction. Like San Francisco, you come to an intersection. Half the time, you can't look down the street until you pull out into the street. It can be really uncomfortable.
It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts there. And then you get things like fog and rain and stuff. So it's just bad inclement weather that happens too.
But I think the worst thing is the sort of extremely uncooperative other road users, right? Those are the things that really like set it. Because I can remember walking through downtown San Francisco one time, and I saw this thing. It felt like the perfect sort of traffic trifecta, which was like, you had a bus trying to make a left turn at a light, and the light had changed, and people were blocking the box, and people, there were a whole bunch of pedestrians that were crossing against the thing, and there was a guy on a bicycle riding in the pedestrian traffic, like dodging pedestrians, trying to go through the crosswalk, and at the same time there was a guy on a motorized skateboard coming in the other direction, trying to dodge the bike, who's trying to dodge the people, and the people are trying to dodge the cars, they're blocking the box, and it's just like chaos, right? And like rush hour in San Francisco, it's just like that. All the intersections are like that for like an hour every day. It like a really difficult perception problem.
Yeah. I mean, so good and good on Tesla, of course, too, because obviously they were located there as well in the Bay Area, but a lot of practice in that. You can see Omar Holmar's catalog drives around there a lot, and it's astounding how well it does in that area.
It works better for him than it does for me. Like I use it in San Francisco from time to time too. And I don't want to say, I don't think he's cherry picking his videos. I think he's pretty honest about he drives it a lot in San Francisco and he's really comfortable with it. But in the downtown parts of San Francisco, there are parts where like, I just don't want to use it. It's too much hassle.
Yeah. And I think he just also has an incredible tolerance for not intervening. Yeah, that's what it seems like. He's just willing to let it go until the last possible second, and it's like, no, it still worked. So anyway, but I think, so I don't know if you've had a chance to look at 11.4 or 11.4.1 release notes, but there's a lot of stuff in there. Lane changes, smoothness, more lane changes. It seems like I've been complaining for ages, it seems like, about that midterm planner. And I don't think Tesla calls it that, but between the Google Maps navigation and the second-to-second don't crash into stuff, there's that like little 20 to 30 second thing. And I've always felt like that's been the weak point of full self-driving. And it looks like in this version, 11.4 and 11.4.1, they're really, really honing in on that.
But between 1069 and 11, so that I call that the planner. I think that's generally what's considered the planner. The planner, like for these self-driving applications, it's not the navigation system. It's not the route planner that decides, what are the next 5 turns going to be. The planner is, what am I going to do over the horizon that I can see? It looks, it makes its decisions based on the road parts it can see. And they didn't, I think toward the end of 1069, they started providing mapping hints to the planner. Now, the planner in 10.69, it was kind of like a single action planner. Like it would only plan far enough through the next kind of tiny atomic action, like one lane change, one acceleration, one deceleration, one turn. And so the really big change to me in my experience of driving 11 is that they now have a planner which is more of a physical horizon. It doesn't stop at a single option. So like it can do like multiple lane changes. And when it does a lane change, it can like decelerate, lane change, accelerate, like it all is a single movement. So it feels much smoother, but when they did this, and it feels to me like the big changeover is that they're now trajectory planning for all of the other road users that could potentially interact with you. So all the pedestrians, all the other cars and that kind of stuff. So instead of, what is my current state? Do I have clear space to do one thing and then do that thing and then reevaluate it again? So it's very mechanical, like clunky, Yeah. And of course, which is why you can't get into the lane in order to make your turn, right? Because it wants 5 seconds to reevaluate every time it does a maneuver. And now it's doing 2, 3, 4 maneuvers. It's chaining them together. Right. And where a maneuver is maybe accelerate, maybe turn the wheel, maybe decelerate, that, all of those things. And it's delightfully better. And it's, so now for quite a while, you had that thing where like, if you turned and you had to get over a couple of lanes to make the next turn and it was a short block, like it just wasn't going to do that. It didn't, or the thing where, you're in the HOV lane on the highway. I don't know if you have those out there, but they're always the number 1 lane on the freeway. And then the exit is almost
the opposite side. Yeah.
So you get out and it's got a lane. Right. And it wasn't, if there was very much traffic at all, your uncertainty about being able to make it. So then the car's like, well, get out early and then you don't get the benefit of the HOV lane for like 3 miles or 5 miles until you get your exit, or you get out at the last minute and gamble that you can do the 5 lane changes.
Yeah. And that's what the previous version did, was it would err on the side of like 3 miles away. It would start to get over and you're like, sometimes way too early, I'll be stuck in traffic for half an hour because I'm sitting,
No, I mean, they went back and forth on that. They, initially, like in the early 10 series or in the late 9s, they started out trying to be aggressive and it just didn't work. There were too many complaints. And then it started doing the other thing. Let's be really conservative. We'll just stay in the right-hand lane for a long time. And people hated that, right? So you could see they were changing the driving logic like back and forth. And I think at some point they got to where it was time of day and location dependent, like how aggressive it would be. Like, during rush hour, it would behave differently than if it wasn't rush hour. And so now in 11, they're mentioning that they're starting, the camera system is like, is it crowded? And then it changes its behavior based on what it sees instead of like some table that it has in memory that it's playing. But yeah, so the nav system has always been essentially completely independent of the planner. And it's still that way. The nav system decides where you're going to drive, and it doesn't really take any feedback from FSD about that kind of stuff. It just makes its decision. But it does provide hints along the lines of, you're going to turn right and you're going to go 300 feet and you're going to turn left and you're going to have to go from the right lane. You're going to have to make 3 lane changes or something like that. So now the planner has the opportunity to know that it needs to be more aggressive, or it can be less aggressive to do that kind of stuff. And they started doing that in 10, and now it seems like they're adding more hints, and it's getting better at that kind of stuff. Like the number, getting the freeway exit to where I live off of the 210 here, you get off and you literally got like 50 feet to make 3 lane changes, and then you got to do a right turn. And it never did that. It never see like it could be the middle of the night, right? No cars on the road or something like that. And you'd come down and think you still couldn't do the 3 lane changes in order to make the intersection. Now it does. Like every time it makes it.
That's cool.
So it's a pretty, for me, the use cases that I experience, like it's been also, when I first got it, I was in Austin visiting family out there, and 10.69 it had a lot of behaviors that really manifested in Austin, especially surrounding, like, because Austin's got the highway system is kind of weird where, they have highways and then they have access roads, and the access on and off the highways is in the middle of long stretches. It's not near,
which is really weird,
intersections. So it's got great flow. Like there's a lot of really cool things about it. Right. But some of the ramps are really weird. Like some of the ramps are really, really short. And in the map, you could tell that, you'd have this super short, you'd get out, you'd have this 55-mile-an-hour access road, and you'd have this really short ramp. And then you'd be getting on a highway that was, that would have like a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Right.
But the speed on the ramp would be 35. Right. The map speed on the ramp would be 35. Like, what are you thinking? Like, this is never going to work. So there were all kinds of places you just, like, it wasn't very smart about that kind of stuff. And, it's gotten a little, like 11, I almost never had interventions. And I had it, my mom, I was staying near my sister, and my mom lives like 35 miles away on the other side of Austin or something like that. And I had it drive me back and forth between my mom's and my sister's house, like round trip every day for like a solid week, had maybe 1 intervention. Right. Wow. And like 10 just couldn't do that at all. And 11 here in LA now, for me, like I haven't had an intervention on, man, I don't think I've had an intervention in like a week or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, a safety critical intervention.
Yeah. Right. That's why I said it's that hybrid thing, because it's like, I'll get annoyed that it's picked a slower lane. And I'll be like, oh, this lane has no traffic in it, I'm going to go. So I'll intervene for that. But I mean, we just drove 1,100 miles to see my parents and back. And even on the highway, it's like, the only thing that's weird and that I have to intervene in is now it used to always hug the right-hand lane, which pissed off people like Sandy Monroe, but now it always sits in the fast lane. And I'm like, no, you gotta get, so there's no option anymore to say like, please go over and be a nice driver and don't.
You can do the minimal lane changes thing and just tell it to go where you want. That's what works for me.
Oh, but will it change back again? Because it's really good about getting around cars. Yeah, that's the problem.
It'll, if you do minimal lane changes, the only lane changes it does are the ones necessary to stay on route. So like, so for instance, if you get in the middle lane and you tell it minimal lane changes and you got 5 miles to your exit, like it won't do anything until you start getting close to your exit.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think it's like it starts off in the proper lane, but then, there's a truck or something and it pulls out to pass the truck, but then it just sits there and it never goes back to the other lane. So anyway, I'm hoping that maybe 11.4 something, they will reintroduce the option, because it used to be that little checkbox or radio button that you would say, please go get out of the passing lane. So, and I know I'm sure Sandy Monroe is ecstatic about this, but I'm not. So. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was saying, try the minimal lane. So
okay, I'll try it. Yeah.
Karen uses it on highways exclusively too, and she hates that. She doesn't like it when the car does a lane changes. She thinks is dumb. So on nav on autopilot, she always hit the she would turn off nav on autopilot until she was getting close to her destination and turn it back on, because she just wanted control. And on 11, I mean, since we've had the single stack and it's using FSD on the highway, she just hits that button and she seems satisfied with it. So maybe that'll work for you.
Okay, I'll try that. Yeah, I know my wife tends to be like that too, because last night, the part she was driving, it kept trying to pass slower traffic and she kept canceling the passing thing. And I was like, she's like, I don't want it changing lanes. And I was like, well, just try the button that says minimal lane changes. So then it'll just park, and it'll just stay there. So yeah, it seemed to work well for her. So I will try that myself just to see if maybe it'll keep it from being so agitated. Okay. Yeah. So I guess you're still driving 11.3.6. Is that correct? Or do you have 11?
Yeah, I'm a plebe, right? I get I'm not one of the OG testers that gets early access to anything.
Yeah. Somebody, Tesla Bull or something. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but anyway, his handle on Twitter, but he has 11.4.1, and I was like, wow, good for you. So
yeah, nice. I think he must be I don't know who he is. I think he must be an employee because he always gets the employee releases. Right. But I know none of the other OG testers have it yet. So it's not like the general public hasn't had any access to it, and maybe won't for another point release or two. And on 10.3 we didn't get it until .3, and then only some people got it. It wasn't until .4 that it came out, so they needed a couple of .revs to get to where they were comfortable giving it to the fleet.
Right. Yeah, I was one of the very last people that finally got it. It seemed like everybody else in the world had it, and I was still on 10.69. I was like, come on, guys. So I'm going to move off of full self-driving in just a second, but Elon Musk just today talked about how version 12 of he said like 11.4.1 was a major release, but they didn't want to call it 12 because, if I'm remembering his quote correctly, that's reserved for when they have AI stack from vision to control. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that, because we've got to be getting pretty close to that benchmark at this point. But where do you think like legacy code, software 1.0 might still be in there?
Well, I would guess that there's lots of little places where it is. And an interesting question is like, exactly what does he mean by getting the stuff out? If you can go from vision all the way through to your basic control inputs, like if that's the primary flow, you can still have some code on the side that's monitoring the system, right? Like having guardrails on the thing is not necessarily a bad idea. And you might want guardrails on it for lots of reasons, but they don't necessarily have to be in the control path. They can be a parallel monitoring thing. So is he talking about that? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I'm surprised it's happening faster than I thought. I wasn't expecting them to do control, because it just seemed like a lower priority until after you basically had, perception is fundamental. That has got to work. And then once perception is working pretty well, you want to really nail the near field out to the horizon planning, because that's so much of the user experience is that kind of stuff. And it needs to work well. You need to figure out what you're going to do. And then control kind of feels like it's kind of an add-on, but it might be the case that like if you have a planner and you're in traffic, like, I don't know if you've been in super heavy traffic and 11 wants to get off the highway, it'll do these lane changes that are like right angle turns, right? Like it does crazy aggressive lane changes. And it's beautiful. Like it's like humans in heavy traffic where if you got 3 or 4 lanes of pretty heavy traffic and there's any kind of like slip between the lanes, like one's moving a little faster than the other. Yeah. And if the cars are really close together, it's nerve-wracking to make a lane change because you have to watch the car ahead of you and the car behind you at the same. You just can't, like, as a human, you just need a lot of things. But of course, autopilot, it sees all that at the same time, right? Like it's looking where it's going and it can see where it is, the guy behind you, the guy in front of you, and all that stuff. It can watch all this stuff simultaneously. And it's taken me a little time to get comfortable with the fact that the car can see it all. I don't need to judge it according to what I can't see and whether it feels safe. But so the thing is, you want pretty good control, and you need a good model of how your control works if you're going to do those maneuvers that are time critical and safety critical in tight traffic, where you've got a tight radius turns that you're doing in traffic, right? The geometry is complicated. It's not, approximate my when you're traveling on a highway to a first approximation, you can treat your lane changes as direct sideways movements, right?
Yeah.
Because the angle is relatively shallow, and the distance between the leading car and the trailing car, like you don't have to model the size of the car and where the corners are in order to be able to safely have space. You can just pretend, in your software, we're going to move directly left. Well, in traffic, when you're moving slow, you can't do that. You want to get out of your lane, not block the other lane, and that kind of stuff. So it could well be the case that you need to get control in the loop. Like the AI system has to have authority to say exactly what path the front tires are going to take in order to be able to pull those maneuvers off, right? Because you can't do and so that might be part of what's going on. The other thing is there's a lot of modeling. I mean, as a human being, if you drive a car, the car becomes an extension of your body. And there's all kinds of complicated things that you do when you're, it's like when you come to a stop sign in a car, if it has regular shock absorbers and springs, it's like beginning drivers, they do that thing where they come to the stop and the car goes, wonk, 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 because they stop or something like that. So as a human, like as an experienced driver, what you learn to do is just as the car comes to zero, you let off on you don't just let off on the brake, you slowly let off on the brake. And so essentially what you're doing is you're using your foot on the brake to modulate the damping, like you're actively damping the car so that you don't get the flop, flop, flop. And people aren't even aware that they do this. You just learn to do it because you don't want to get seasick every time you come to a stop sign, right? So that's a thing that is better done by, like, you can physically model the dynamics of the car, but there are all of these weird corner cases. What if the road is wet? What if I'm facing downhill or I'm going uphill? What if I have to creep right after this? Because you don't want to, if you come to a stop and the car tips forward and then you accelerate, well, now the car is going to, you're going to have this exaggerated body movement, and so putting all that stuff in a neural network and letting it model the dynamics of the car is just going to provide more comfort for the people sitting in the car. And so that's another good reason why you might want to do control. Like, you could do all of that stuff with physical modeling, but a neural network is going to perform better, and it's going to perform better in more different situations, and it's going to take less compute to do it.
Well, I'll add one thing to that. I think absolutely you're right. And I love the idea of the human being part of the feedback loop, and because you're right. You learn how to and now that I'm doing one pedal driving, it's like you learn how to take your foot off the accelerator so that the regen hits at just the right amount. So you slow down so it's the same thing, just with a different amount. But I'll add in that I think one of the other reasons that they've gone full into the control stack with machine learning is in the 4.1 release or .4.1 release notes, where they talk about probabilistic. They're thinking about lane cut when people cut you off, or they leave your lane, or things like that, or when you have to go out of a lane into another lane. They do a Monte Carlo simulation inside the stack to look at different probabilities of what might be happening. And we saw that with the lane thing. John Emmons talked about that during AI Day 2. And so it's like, if you're going to be doing that kind of Monte Carlo thing, then it probably makes sense to have a probabilistic control scenario, because you could kind of weight those things, and maybe you have two that are very similar, but they also have very similar weights, and you can kind of just fudge it in between those. It doesn't have to be. Or
alternately, like if you've got two highly divergent things. Right. So this is the thing humans will do, like when they've got to do a lane change, like, you think you're going to be able to do the lane change, but you're hedging your bet in case you can't make the lane change. Like, what if the guy behind me doesn't cooperate and moves forward to block my thing? You can't afford to go so fast that you don't have space to stop, if you're moving into a faster lane kind of stuff. And so as a human, you kind of split the difference in your judgments. It's like, instead of putting all your margin on one side of the decision or the other, you split the difference. And so you have to have a control regime that lets you split the difference between those two,
right. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's very cool. And the weird part is, they talk about having machine learning or AI throughout the whole stack, but I feel like at some point, like, the glue inside of it has got to be just more regular code. You go from your one neural network model, and then you have to transfer the data to another. And it feels to me like that's kind of always, maybe I'm wrong, but it's always going to have to be some sort of more traditional code that's like, oh yeah, here's the outputs of this. Now take these and put them into the input of the other. And that little piece, that glue that holds it together. But maybe not. Maybe
I mean, well, neural networks are implemented with regular code.
Yeah, right? Exactly. It's true.
Like the matrix multiplier itself isn't a neural network, right? Yeah. It's written in C and it runs on a GPU, it runs on the NNU in the case of hardware 3. So, yeah, it's like, at what point do you call it regular code and not? Like, what does it have to be doing before we say, if it's evaluating heuristics, independent of what the neural network decides to inject, to have an influence over what's going on, then I would say that that's a heuristic. Like if you have a list of rules that you're maintaining, you've got your neural network, and then you have this separate sets of rules. This, no matter what the neural network decides, never do this, always do that. If you have those rules, you still have heuristics in there.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that's probably a good way to break it down. It's sort of like if it's just part of the flow and it's just taking data and transferring it from one neural network to another, that doesn't count. But if it's actually putting its finger on the scale, if it's saying, no, that's not right. No, what you really need to do is this instead, then that wouldn't be the correct answer. So, okay, cool. Well, turning from that, topic to a tiny little topic, which is the craziness of large language models in the past 6 months. Do you want to start off with any sort of general take?
I think beautiful.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I feel like I've waited my whole life for this. It's just awesome.
Speaking of that building metaphor, I feel like we've been laying the foundations for decades. That the workers have been in there. Jeff Hinton and Jan LeCun and a whole bunch of other people all the way back to like the 1950s were digging around in the foundation and trying to figure out how to do it. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, and the skyscraper's just been going up.
Yeah, they were lighting a fire and suddenly if we add oxygen and then poof.
I don't know if anybody was ever like a kid like me, but there were incidents like that where I was like, ooh, gasoline. And it's like, what if I, do this? And it's like,
boom, yeah. Yeah. That's actually a word I see a lot when people talking about AI, foom, which is, it's that like when the fire suddenly catches and boom, it goes up. Yeah. It's wild. It's been, a huge chunk of my keeping up with what's going on is me, like, I'd spend a certain amount of time on Twitter. I have a ML curated list of people that I follow. And then, the interesting stuff comes up in the morning and you go down the rabbit hole on each one of those things. And at some point you're done and you go do real work or something like that. And lately it's like, I never get to because there's so many rabbit holes, because there's so many things that seem really important that happen like almost every day, definitely every week. Something comes up and I'm like, I need to understand that before I do anything else. Right. And now it's just like lately like whole days go down the tube of just like reading about what feel like really foundational improvements or really foundational movements. Like did you see if you haven't read it, you should check out We Have No Moat. It's and neither does OpenAI. So it was there's an outfit called Semi-Analysis. It's a blog newsletter by a guy named Dylan Patel who he mostly covers he writes about technical aspects of the semiconductor business, the chip business, the compute, various things having to do with compute. And so he leaked a memo from a Google internal engineer that was basically commenting on the state of AI in the world today and how massively it changed after the release. So Meta released a model called Llama, and Llama has led to lots of drama. So there were, for a long time, we had the really powerful large language models were like, you had OpenAI doing GPT and then ChatGPT's, 1, 2, 3, and then ChatGPT and GPT-4. And they're like really impressive. Like GPT-4, definitely the most performant model in the world right now, like it head and shoulders above everything else. But you had a lot of other entities working on big models, like Meta worked on some. Google famously had this series of Palm models and lots of other models that they've done. And DeepMind has done all kinds of more specific stuff. They haven't been focused on a large language model thing. But we were in this world where there were these powerful general purpose models. and a couple of big corporations each had one. And if you wanted to use it, you got an AI key and you could go, and they had a little gatekeeper that you could only ask certain questions and you can only ask so many, right? In other words, we had these great AIs, but they were totally like in boxes at these big companies, right? And so 2 months ago, it seemed like that was how the world was going to go. Like there were going to be more and more companies, and the things would get faster and faster. But you'd have these gatekeepers, because the thinking was the models were so big, you need a huge computer to run them on. So like even if you release them to people, they couldn't run it at home. Like maybe a big company could get a copy and run it in their own data center, and that was a place people thought things were going to go, right? So Meta did this thing where they trained up a model called Llama, which it's basically a large language model. It was, so ChatGPT, there's kind of like, there's the pre-training, and then there's the instruction training, and then you do this reinforcement learning from human feedback, this other stage, right? So people are releasing models, and some of them are just the pre-trained model, and some are the others. Well, the pre-training, that's like 99% of the cost. Like that's where all the money goes. So you want a big company or a big entity that's got a lot of money, deep pockets, and a lot of expertise. They build one of these things, but then they could just release the weights into the public domain, right? Llama. So of course, Meta has had these things happen recently where they got a lot of crap for releasing something into the public. And then there would be some blowback, and then Meta's lawyers or the PR department would decide that they had to take it down or whatever. So when they released Llama, they put this caveat on it, which was like you could say, I'm a researcher and I would like access to the weights, right? And you could sign up and you would get a copy for research use. And but they sort of released it under those constraints, right? And they released 3, 7,
it's
7, 13, 30, and 65 billion parameter sizes. So
I have the two smaller ones on my computer. The two bigger ones are pretty monstrous.
You can run the big one on a PC now. A guy, there's a
because of
CPP.
Yeah, like what? It's down to like something like
4-bit quantization.
Absolutely crazy. I think I've heard you can run at least one of them on your phone.
Yeah, you can. It's a guy named Tim Detmers has been working on I think he's at Google now, has been for a long time working on quantization and getting it to work really well. And he last year released this 4-bit quantization scheme. And a guy named Georgy Gerasimov, I think, like this alpha hacker, like he just knocked it together so that you could modify a Llama, and all of a sudden, like you can run it on a laptop. The big model, the 65 version. Anyway, so all of these are new. So what we've seen is, the Llama models got out, and it didn't take very long before they just got leaked, and anybody could use them for anything, and you could get your hands on them, right? Even though it's under a research license. And there's some debate about whether Meta knew this was going to happen, and that they had it in mind. It's like, hey, they just got out there. We had a license. It's not our fault, right?
Hey, but I want to be clear. I went through the correct channels. I did my research and I got access officially. So I didn't take it off BitTorrent, although I know most people did. So,
it's a lot faster to get it off of BitTorrent. That's what I recommend. Anyway, so the world changed, right? It looked like we were in this world where, you were going to have these big models, and there were going to be these gatekeepers, and there were, and then what happened is there was this open source thing that happened. So now, incidentally, Llama is not the only one. There are several other entities. Mosaic ML has just been releasing stuff. Hugging Face is doing a set. Stability AI is doing a set. They all plan to release the weights for various big models.
And then I think OpenGPT is planning on releasing the weights too, right? The one that Yannick Kilchner is heading, or not heading, but part of.
Open Assistant.
I thought it was Open. Okay, Open Assistant. Sorry. Anyway, but I believe they're planning on releasing the weights too, right? Or are they not?
So the Open Assistant right now, the stack that they've got is for doing those later stages. Not for doing the pre-training. They do the instruction training and potentially the RLHF part at the back end. They might be doing something as far as building their own model, but they don't really need to, because there are lots of other people building models that are coming into the public domain. So anyway, so now 2 months later, we're in this very different world. And once Llama went out, there was just like this explosion of activity of just like people getting it, modifying it, doing stuff with it. All of a sudden, they were finding ways to tweak it for different optimizations, to do fine tuning. There's this technique called LoRa, low rank adaptation, which is basically, it's a low compute way of it takes relatively little compute to basically fine tune even very large models. Like you can do it on a laptop, you can do it on a single GPU. So once the models kind of got out, there were all of these people who had an incentive to figure out how to use them in a low resource way to solve a particular problem, just an explosion of these things. And all of a sudden, the world looked really different. Now it looks like the way most people are going to be able to access these things is a lot of these models will be running on edge devices. They will be a lot smaller because people with a lot less, like big research organizations, they have supercomputers. Until you start doing inference at scale, you don't really care about trying to make the model small. It's not a problem for you.
Exactly.
But if you're, if you're a guy who's got a desktop PC or something like that, the first thing you do is you figure out how to get it what you want running on your machine.
Right.
So the models, so small models have gotten just so much more performant, like literally in 2 months, because a lot of people were incented to try to solve this problem. Anyway, so like in the last 2 months, the future just looks completely different than it did 2 months ago because of the chain of events that was initially sparked by the Llama models coming out, but now is getting powerfully reinforced. Like even if Meta hadn't released those, these other entities that are doing the big models and releasing, which they would have done it just would have been a little bit later. So this probably would have happened anyway. But now we've seen how the outside world responds to having these weights out. Anyway, the paper that I talked about, we have no moat and neither does OpenAI. It's on Dylan Patel's semi-analysis page.
I've written it down. I'm going to take a look at this after we talk.
It's really easy to understand even if you're not in the space, and it's one guy's perception. He's not necessarily right. Like he's expressing some opinions, but he also has a timetable about what's going on, which is a very interesting reflection on how the state of all of this stuff has changed, and it's probably going to change again, right? And I don't know what it's going to change into, but more unexpected things are bound to happen. But the explosion of activity that happened out after Llama, and plus all these big new models that are coming out, and all the new SOTA results that are getting demonstrated from them. It's great. It's awesome. I mean, the world is good.
And then, I mean, the other thing, and the crazy thing is, I don't know, we probably had a chat somewhere around a year ago. And at that point, it was like diffusion models. I can't believe they can produce this cool artwork. That seems like so yesterday's news. It's like now Midjourney.
It's still true. Diffusion model. Have you seen the Midjourney stuff?
Oh gosh, lately? I know. I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about it.
Midjourney 5.1. Like it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
So, you see pictures which are like one of these is an AI and the other one's a real photo. Can you guess which is which? Like 6 months ago, forget it. Like it was impossible to generate stable diffusion models that would fool somebody who was paying attention into, confusing it with a real photo. And now we're there. Like Midjourney 5.1 is so good that if you're an expert and you know the software really well, you can look for telltales and gradually figure it out. But a normal person, they've got no way to tell anymore, right?
I saw. I don't know if you saw this, but I saw a tweet. I'll try to put this up here if I can find it. But it was a tweet that said evolution of Midjourney, and it had version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5.1. And the first one, it was like like a drunk Picasso made it or something, right? It's like pretty awful. And the progression, and it was like what? 12 or 13 months. Yeah. It was just like, what? How did it go? That was a Dave Lee
tweet, I think, a couple of days ago. He did that. He
put maybe it was him that did. Oh, well, that'll make it easy for me to find it then. So anyway, but I mean, the evolution is incredible, but anyway, I was being a little funny and facetious about it, but I was saying when ChatGPT came out and then all of the explosion since then, since November, that's sort of become the big thing. But then we're looking at things like Hugging GPT that's become sort of like a hub that they're working on, that then you could go off and you can spit out tasks to things like diffusion models and stuff like that from a centralized source. So yeah, it's really amazing how creative people are with this technology. Like once, as you said, I think the big thing was that once Llama and these other models got released and people could fine tune them themselves, but even beyond that, people, once they got access to the API from OpenAI, they were able to utilize that as a ground and then put things on top of that as well. And it's just astounding how creative humanity as a whole is. I think that maybe the biggest lesson for me is even more than the AI. It's like, we're just like really creative as a species.
There's this, I don't know who originally said this, but it's something along the lines of most of the smart people in the world don't work for you, right? They don't work for your company. They don't work for your group. Most of them, right? So the thing is, if you want to harness, like you once you get your stuff out there, it's shocking how much can happen, just like way beyond the resources of any individual organization. And, you know, OpenAI has got a lot of resources and a lot of smart people. Google, you know, they're huge, and yet the two of those companies, they cannot hold a candle to what the world outside of those organizations has done in the last couple of weeks. Like, they never would have gotten here where we are today in any reasonable period of time. And yet here we are, a couple, 6 weeks, 2 months later. And the efforts of people outside those organizations has just massively expanded the pie of possibilities.
Right. So, all right. So next question, what is the next big development if you had to put on your prognosticator hat? I don't even have a clue at this point. I'm just trying to keep up. But like, if you had to, so we've got diffusion models was last year. Large language models was late last year, this year. What's late 2023 or early 2024? What's the next big thing that's going to pop up that people are going to go, wow?
So a few weeks ago, I was thinking that multimodal models was going to be the obvious thing, so that you can put text, audio, photos, video all into a model. And so GPT-4 has image input that isn't, it's alpha right now, so only alpha users have it, and very few people have access to it. But that's the kind of thing where, you get your phone out and you take pictures of your tax forms and you tell, okay, and then you take pictures of all your receipts and you tell GPT-4 to do your taxes for you, right? I mean, like, literally that scale of thing. Like, it can take a poor quality photo of a form and, from the context, figure out how to fill it out for you and generate a PDF or whatever the deal is in like one go. So that's a really significant capability. Being able to take video in, like, that's going to be big for lots of things. So I would have said multimodal. I didn't think, and there was another thing that's actually really important, which is having really big context windows. Yes. So large language models, the weights themselves are trained on data. And then when you're doing a particular action with them, they have an input window called a context window. And it has a fixed size, which is determined, by the way that the network is trained and the way that and it's very hard to make them bigger, right? Which is why, ChatGPT had like 2K and 4K tokens, which is roughly 1.5 tokens per word. So, maybe a 3,000 word kind of chunk of text that they could ingest. And that would be their whole operating context for being able to supply a response to you. So that's a lot. You can do a lot of stuff with it. One thing you can't do with it is like dump in, like a congressman can't dump 1,000-page new law and ask it for a summary. Like, what am I voting for here? Right? Exactly. Like, that would be a really useful thing for a congressman to have, like somebody dumps a tome on your desk and you have to vote on it tomorrow and you want to be able to ask questions about it. So people have figured out how to do that trick by having it, having a small context window AI kind of go through, summarize it in sections, and then summarize the summaries and that kind of stuff to kind of work your way up a tree. But that's not as good as if you just have the whole context window, if you can dump the whole 100 pages or whatever in there. So, but like in the last 2 months, like, people have figured out all these tricks for making effectively really big context. And just like an hour ago, I saw that Anthropic has 100,000 token input window model now that they're releasing. And it's like GPT-4, it has, by default, it's an 8K context, or sorry, it's a 4K context window that you can use. There's an 8K that beta users have had, and there's a 32K, which alpha and beta users have had. And that lets you put in like a 25-page document or something and ask very complicated things about it. Anthropic did a thing where, like, they would drop a whole novel in and change one line in the novel and then have it reinterpret the whole novel in terms of the one line that they changed in it. Like, that's a pretty shocking. It's going to take a while for it to sink in what the possibilities are. When you can have a substantial document, which is entirely in context for for one of these models. So anyway, I thought that was off the table a couple months ago. Like if you'd asked me, because there are these rules, the size of the model and the compute it takes, it grows as a square of the context window. So every time you double the context window, it takes four times as much compute, right? And so that's called the quadratic growth problem, right? It goes as a square. And if you are there sub-quadratic ways to pull that trick? Well, it turns out there are, and people have already figured them out, and they're already using them on big models. And like, I didn't see that coming. I thought about the thing myself. It's hard figuring out how to do that. But, you know, the work's been done, and it may not give you the same performance as a full quadratic, you know, kind of attention scaling thing. But it can be more than good enough if you're clever about how you implement it. And apparently, like, people are already making huge progress on it, and that's going to be enormous. So I didn't see that one coming out, and that's probably more impactful in the short term than the multimodal stuff is. Okay. When modality gets to video, really, it's the video versions of Stable Diffusion. They're getting better at like a shocking rate. I've seen there's these two viral. What is it? It's like, if Wes Anderson, the one I saw yesterday was, what if Wes Anderson did it? It's a trailer for a Wes Anderson version of Lord of the Rings. And it's so good. It's really good. Wow. I mean, it's really funny for one thing, but then you look at it, and it was basically done with Midjourney, you know, and the trailer, the script for the trailer was written by GPT-4. It's like all generatively modeled stuff, and you watch this thing, like, it's a couple minutes long, it's shockingly high quality, and apparently it was 25 hours of work for the guy that did it. Like nothing. It was just like, what was the other one? He did one before that too that was it was a different movie. Wasn't, man, I can't remember now, but anyway, same guy, he did something else super funny. Or the Harry Potter Balenciaga ad. I saw that. That was, I mean, it's like, that was so good, but the new stuff makes it look dated now already, right? The new stuff is, and it's only been like 2 months or 6 weeks or something. It's crazy how fast things are happening.
And the big thing about video is, you know, I thought it was going to take a long time for video to come around, because number one, there's at least 24 of them per second. So, you know, rendering out one image is one thing, but rendering out 24 or 30 or whatever per second is a lot. And then continuity between frames. It's like, you know, I saw Andrej Karpathy maybe 18 months ago, maybe it was only a year ago. He did, you know, the dreaming thing where you could like change the input a little bit, the noise of the input. And it would like alter, you know, dreaming of spaghetti or something like that. And that was fine, but it had no continuity. It was just a bunch of images that would just change over time. But now, I mean, the fact that they have continuity between frames is just mind blowing how fast that's happening. It's pretty.
Yeah, crazy. I think we're only, you know, we're only now single digit years away from Hollywood blockbusters being made this way, like that quality being accessible. There's still a lot of work to be done in figuring out the right way to do it, and scaling the compute and a bunch of other things like that. But like, it's totally, and then, you know, once that stuff scales down to where you can run on a laptop, and we're well on our way to that, to being able to do this kind of stuff, man, the creative juices of like, so I saw somebody, I think this might've been Grimes, or somebody commenting on Grimes' stuff, talking about how, you know, if you're an artist right now and you do paintings or you do drawings and that kind of stuff, you might feel pretty threatened by the development of Stable Diffusion and whatnot, right? Because you have this thing you like it the way that it is, and this is maybe a threat to the economics, or maybe it's just a threat to the uniqueness and the value of you know, stuff that human beings do. But the thing to consider is like, well, if you use these tools, instead of making drawings, you can make movies. You know, you can make it like you have a novel, make an anime out of it, you know, make a, like the amount of like quality, interesting content is going to explode. Because
I can just,
the cost of making stuff is just going to go to zero.
I mean, I use all these tools just for fun. I've gotten up to around 50,000 word novels with ChatGPT, and it starts to lose the focus after a while. So I've been working on how to make it understand. But the thing that I realized from that was that the context window is the critical factor. I think what happens is it just loses the beginning. So, and then it doesn't know quite where it started, and it's just going on and on and on. But so in my mind, I think you're right that in terms of large language models, that ability to keep expanding the context window, which for people, if you want kind of an analogy to it, it'd be like your working memory, right? So people probably know that. It's like a human can usually keep 7 things in their head. That's supposedly what we can do. And apparently ChatGPT could keep, tens of thousands of things in its head at this point, or other large language models. But anyway, the bigger that window is, the bigger the working memory, the more it's capable of understanding what's going on. So I think what you were talking about really, really tails into I had 2 other big questions to ask. And the first one is, and it's very related to what you were just talking about, is what do you think about the future of employment for humanity? I think we're at the existential point at this point where it's like, holy crap, we might all be out of jobs in a few years, or most of us. There's a lot of or is it going to be this wonderful, unicorns and rainbows world where we're all doing amazing stuff and it's great?
The transition is going to be volatile.
Okay.
Right. And it was 150 years ago, everybody was a farmer, right?
Yeah.
And so when the tractor got invented, like all the farmers, 90% of the farmers, like their jobs were going to go away. It took a while for the transition, right? But like, what are all those people who aren't farmers? What are they doing today? Right. And then the answer is like, we got doctors, we got lawyers, we have accountants, we have we have prompt engineers, we have people working on AI, we have scientists, there's the automation frees up people to go do other things. Now it's people who've made a big investment in doing a thing that gets displaced or gets changed in a really significant way when a new tool comes out. Well, guess what? The value of the thing you were doing before has gone down, and that if you can't deal with that economically, you have to get better at doing it. Like one thing you can do is you can use the tools and you can just output 10 times as much as you did before. The price goes down, but you're still making the same money, or you're still making money anyway.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, you go do something else because there's just not enough economic value in the thing you were doing before, because now a robot can do it for pennies on the dollar compared to what you wanted to charge for doing that. So those transitions are going to happen. In the long run, what happens is we get to a lot more people doing work they enjoy a lot more and being paid way more for it. Like that's where we are today compared to the farmers, right?
Right.
Not very many people today, like approximately 0, would happily go back to, spending their life in the field with a hoe, right? That was what you did before. And your pay is you get a couple of potatoes, right? Now, we have cars, we have nice houses, we have roads. Our kids all can go to schools that are nice, that have real teachers, right? And the society got richer, but that doesn't mean it wasn't hard for those farmers, right? There was a transition that you had to get through, and this is going to be in many respects, it's a less jolting transition than say the agricultural one was, because we're a much richer society. I mean, we can afford to do things that the world couldn't afford to do back when the tractor was invented. The flip side is this is going to happen a lot faster. Like this isn't going to unfold over decades, right? It's going to happen much faster than that. And so a lot of, people have, especially people in the AI space, like I've been hearing these conversations for like 20, 30 years, like the circles that I'm in. It was just a matter of time. It was going to happen. And then what were people going to do? And this is where the whole idea of universal basic income came from, because they're dorks, right? They don't know anything about the real world. So of course, the further thing is like, wow, the robots will make so much money. We'll just hand it out, right? That's the solution. If you don't have any kind of social awareness, you might think that that's like a simple, straightforward solution to the thing. improving the social safety net, that's definitely going to be a component of it, because we don't want people falling through the cracks, right? But helping people find their place in a world that's transformed, like, that's better than just giving them a handout. And, you know, we need as a society to come up with solutions to that. And it's going to be complicated. There's not going to be like one fix that does everything for everybody. But luckily, you know, we have millions of people. We have millions of people who will benefit from this kind of stuff. So we can do really complicated things, and we will. Right. You know, we have to do this. It's just, it's going to be challenging for different people at different times as we go through this stuff. But I think the good news is it is freaking unicorns and rainbows at the end of this, right? It's a world that's so much better than the world that we live in right now, that the people 50 years from now, you ask one of them, hey, you want to go back to 2023 or something? And unless we have a nuclear apocalypse or something between now and then, there isn't anybody 50 years from now who's going to be willing to trade. Like, you know, how much would you pay for not going back to before there was anesthetic used in dentistry?
Exactly. I think we can go back to previously in our lives. I remember back to when I was, you know, even into my 20s, with no appreciable internet. Yes, there was the basics of it, but, you know, again, the foundation was being laid and being built, and then suddenly Mosaic appeared. But you know, I can't even remember what it was like not to have access to the world at the desktop or my fingertips. And I would not even want to go back to earlier in my life, because there's like, that would suck. You have to go to the library to look up every freaking thing you want to, you know.
I grew up in some little podunk town that barely had a library, and I spent my childhood being bored out of my skull. Like, I didn't even know we had a library for a long time. When I discovered the library, that was like my salvation. Right. I finally
mine too. I happened to live within walking distance of my library, and I spent every day after school there.
Yeah, and it was a revelation. And the books were all 50 years old, right? Because it's a small town library. There's nothing current at all. And I mean, they had periodicals. Like, I used to read the Scientific American every month when it came out, you know, because that was just like amazing. Hey, there's scientists in the world. Like, I had no idea. And like the thought of going back to something like that, let's just like, oh man, it's inconceivable. Like, I would never want to go back to a world like that.
That's again. The crazy thing about it is, it's like, you don't even have to dial it back to like 100 years ago. You can just go back to 30 years ago, you know, basically, and just go,
depending on who you are.
Yeah, I know, I understand.
I mean,
but
it's like books were a big deal to me. So discovering books and discovering the internet and all was a big deal. But you can imagine people who are like into horses, and you know, they might think, hey, living in a small town and on a horse farm, that might be great. I don't need the internet, because maybe, you know, they're happy reading, you know, paperback novels or whatever the deal is. But very few people want to go back to before Novocaine. That's why I always bring that one up. Or like, you know, in a couple hundred years ago, there wasn't even anesthetic for surgeries, right? So like, if you had to have your gallbladder removed, it was like, you know, they'd get you drunk and strap you to the table, and that was how it was going to turn out. Right? You get a stick.
And let's not forget, we also didn't have antibiotics too, so you're probably going to die of infection afterwards.
You know, I like, what was the deal? Like, quality surgeons were rated according to how fast they operated, right? So like, a guy that could do a gallbladder surgery in 5 minutes was way better than one that took 20 minutes, right? Guess why?
Hadn't even thought about that one, but yeah, you really do want to do that. Okay, so we can talk about other stuff, but the last big ticket item is, of course, the existential one that everyone, especially Elon Musk, talks about, which is the AI going to take over and, you know, treat us like pets or treat us like ants, or is this not going to happen? Or, you know, what do you think is going to happen with the AI singularity that seems to be drawing nearer all the time? Or will it even arrive ever?
So I think when most people in this space are being honest, that there's a lot of rhetoric and advocacy going on. I think a lot of the people who are really worried about the gloom and doom scenario are not convinced that it's high probability, but they are convinced that it's very high impact and it needs to be taken seriously. And in fact, like, my sense of it, this is Elon's rhetoric. Like, if you go back, you know, 5 or 10 years and you look at how he was talking about this stuff, he would say there's a small probability, like a 1% or less than 1% probability of a very bad outcome. And it really deserves a lot of attention because of that. And my guess is he probably still feels that way. You know, but that's not the way he talks about it anymore, because I think a lot of people, advocates, you know, they're not having a debate with other they're not having a debate. They're trying to move the public discussion in a particular direction. And so instead of saying, well, I think here is where they say, I think here is, because they're hoping to move you in that direction.
Right.
So I think there are people who really do think that a bad outcome is likely. I think they're an extreme minority. Okay. I do not believe that a bad outcome is likely. I believe that a bad outcome is quite unlikely, the extreme bad outcome. Right. In fact, I think the likely bad outcome, and many experts will say this also, the likely bad outcome is that introducing a technology is so disruptive to society that it undermines the fabric of society, and that leads to really serious dislocation. Like, that probability is much higher than the AI kills us all. Yetite sort of perspective on where we are. So do I think that's possible? It's not impossible. There's the so-called hard takeoff scenario, right? Which has been around. I can't remember. I think Werner Vinge coined this like back in 1996 in a talk to NASA, where he said, like, there's various ways you can get to he's a guy who coined the term singularity, talked about it in these terms. And he created the original framework for how we talk about this stuff. And to him, a singularity was this technological transition where it's hard to foresee what happens after it. So it's a singularity in that you can't see past it. That was what the term meant. And AI was like, AI has always been high on the list of candidates for the thing that brings the singularity that creates a technological singularity that we as a society end up having to deal with. And so there's these two kind of broad categories of scenarios. One is a soft takeoff, where you're going up this exponential curve, so that like everywhere you are along the curve, you look behind you and it looks flat, and you look ahead of you and it looks like a wall. But that never changes. Like, all the time you're on this curve, right? Because you're getting faster too. Everything is getting faster. Right. And so even though the curve is getting steeper and steeper, your ability to deal with the steepness, it also goes up. So the effect is you have a certain distance forward in time that you're comfortable with being able to make a prediction about. Maybe it's, at one point in time, like my grandfather could look forward 50 or 100 years and he had an idea of what the world was going to be like, and then at some point it became 50 years and then 20 years or something like that. And I think, realistically, people who are really paying attention to technology, somewhere in like the 80s or the 90s, you realize that the window is like 20 years now, and it's getting short really fast. Like, it's getting in the planning horizon, not just a big organization. Like the US Air Force, they used to have this whole group whose job was just to plan what future conflicts would look like 25 years in the future. That was the benchmark, because they had all these planes to buy, and they had all these divisions to make, and all these bases to build, and that kind of stuff. So you had to plan on a 25-year horizon. And then I think it was like in the 80s or 90s where they disbanded that group. Like, they don't exist anymore, right? Because they can't see 25 years. They had to come up with new ways of doing stuff. But that's the Air Force. Now we're getting to a point where it affects people. Like, should my kids go to college? Like, if you have young kids, right? Should you be saving for college? Like, that's a legitimate question to ask, because if you have a kid who's like 10 years old, you don't know what education is going to look like in 10 years. I mean, you can just stay on your track, and a lot of people will do just whatever. They'll do that. But if you're forward thinking, you're like, what would be the best thing for my kid education wise? Like, not making connections, not being socialized, not having time to discover themselves or party with their friends, that kind of stuff. But like, if they actually want to learn stuff, should they be going to college in 10 years? And if that's my rationale for sending them, like, should I do that? That's where we are now. Right. So like in another 5 years, like that window will be 5 years, right? And then 5 years after that, it might be 2 years, right? That's the singularity, is that your ability to make plans gets closer and closer. So does AI drive a singularity? It is very likely driving a singularity for us right now. We're on the slow takeoff, which is you have time to adapt as the window gets shorter. The hard takeoff is this, boom, have an inflection point. And the classic hard takeoff version of the scenario is somebody builds an AI, and then they let the AI modify itself, and it gets good enough to understand itself and make itself better. And you get this self-reinforcing loop. The classic version of the hard takeoff scenario, incidentally, is a short story. It's written by Greg Bear, and it's called Blood Music. And if it's worth reading. It's a short story, so it doesn't take very long to get through it. But it's the classic hard takeoff scenario, and so is there a possibility of a hard takeoff scenario? It's not zero. Will that be disruptive? It will be unbelievably disruptive. Right? It'll be like, that would be unbelievably disruptive, and we don't want a hard takeoff scenario.
Right.
Like we want to avoid a hard takeoff scenario. So that should be a really high priority for us in terms of our planning, regulations, researchers and, an interested population. We need to be on the lookout for things that could plausibly lead to a hard takeoff scenario so we can figure out how to put a lid on that, because we don't want a hard takeoff scenario. So the hard takeoff scenario that's the one case that plausibly leads to like really bad outcomes, that we really, really want to avoid. And that's why you want to look for that. In this, I believe soft takeoff scenarios, like aside from the, it undermines the fabric of society because the transition is happening faster than our social fabric can adapt to it. Aside from that, which is a very serious thing. So I don't want to sweep that under the rug. Like that's a serious thing. That is in terms of expectation value versus impact, like how likely something is multiplied by how big a deal it is, that's a much bigger deal. Because even though the overall impact is less than the doom scenario, it's way more likely to happen. And so we really want to be looking at that. So that's my sort of 10,000 foot take on AI doom.
Yeah. I think, as you say, the hard takeoff scenario is the one that's terrifying. But so you don't give very much odds. I tend to be pretty aligned with what you're saying. And interestingly enough, you're talking about children. I have a 15-year-old as the youngest. I have 2 adult children who are in the film and the music industry, respectively. And I also teach in college. And so all of this stuff right now, I'm like, wow, my 2 adult children, probably their jobs are going to be disrupted and radically changed in the next few years, single-digit years, as you say. And then the 15-year-old, I'm like, what do I tell him about going to school at this point? He's a freshman in high school. It's like, what is college going to look like in 5 years? And certainly in 10 years, it's going to be very different than it is right now. So, but yeah, I think what you're saying is the right way to put it. It's the social fabric aspect. And that's what concerns me much more. I usually relate it to jobs, but it's a lot of other things too. I find that to be potentially amazing, but also potentially terrifying because of how fast it's going to happen. And so many people could have their jobs disrupted. So, I mean, just recently, like last week, the last week of classes we had, I was talking to my students about being flexible. I was like, the best thing you can do is just learn to keep learning and be flexible about whatever it is you do, because whatever you think you're going out into the world to do is unlikely to be the thing you're going to retire doing. Like it's almost inconceivable that at them being 65 years old, they're going to be doing the same job that they're doing at 22.
45. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, like, maybe retirement age will be reduced to 45. So that'll be great. But anyway, but yeah, it's just, well, I don't even know. I mean, perhaps it was inconceivable that I would be doing the job I'm doing when I was 20 years old. I'm not sure. So
the first printed circuit board that I designed was pencil and paper. And then when it came time to like make the printed circuit board, you got a big plastic sheet, clear plastic, and you had all these rolls of black tape that were varying widths or something like that. And you'd draw on the thing what your traces were going to be, and then you'd roll the tape out and you'd cut it with an X-Acto. Like I did that. Yeah. That was how you did it when I started. And then you'd have these sheets of stickers. Like if you were going to put a dip down or a transistor or something like that, you'd have these little stickers that were the copper pattern, and you'd stick them on the clear plastic for that kind of stuff. And then, you'd put it in a machine. You'd buy these printed circuit boards that had resist, photosensitive resist on them, just copper boards or whatnot. And, we'd have machines that drill them out. And it was just like, that was printed circuit boards back in the day when I started. Like the first CAD system I used, I wrote the CAD because I was so tired of the tape thing. But like on an IBM PC, I wrote code for a CAD system to just help doing that. And I wrote auto routers. I did all kinds of stuff like that because you couldn't, like if you were a small company, you couldn't buy the big stuff that was designed to run on fancy workstations. It cost $500,000. So, like this is me, right? Like I'm not that old. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old, right? So the world in my life has changed radically. It has changed so much. And that's nothing. Like that amount of change happens in 5 or 10 years now, 5 years, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, well, there we go. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that we're both aligned with the, I feel like yes, the impact would be completely it would be unforeseeable. I mean, it might be amazing, but the hard takeoff scenario has a huge dramatic impact potential out of that singularity. But I think that the soft takeoff, sorry, not soft impact, but anyway, the soft takeoff scenario is the much more likely one. And that's the one that I'm much more concerned about. It's how to navigate that. I think, as you say, on the far end, if we could magically be 15 years from now, hell, things would probably be still changing like crazy at that. But, barring a nuclear apocalypse, like you say, it's like, I think people are going to look back just like we would look back on the time before there were like smartphones, and we would say like, well, that kind of sucked. It's like, I'd rather live now because it's just a better quality of life. Things are nicer. And so, yeah.
It's going to become a defining problem for people in the next probably 5 or 10 years. It's because, figuring out how to help people adapt to the pace of change in the world is going to be one of those critical tests that our society is going to have to go through. And, so that's where we need to be thinking about it a lot. And a lot of people really are. A lot of people have been thinking about it for a really long time.
Right.
So there's hope. And I think the main reason I think the hard takeoff scenario is really unlikely is because I think we're going to be smart enough to cut it off at the pass and figure out how to ensure that it doesn't happen. I mean, it's not naturally low probability. It's low probability because we make it low probability, because we know it's a problem and we actively try to avoid it. In the same way, nuclear war, I mean, there's plenty of nukes in the world. We didn't have a nuclear war because we worked hard to avoid it. It didn't happen naturally. Like we put the institutions in place. We educated people about how terrible it would be for that to happen. And, and we avoided it.
Yeah. Okay. I agree. I'm just hopefully the one scenario that scares me is that that how much faster computers think than we do. Because at least in the nuclear war scenario, we had other human beings, and so we had the same refresh rate or whatever you want to call it. But a computer is orders and orders of magnitude faster than us. So
you can't outrun a nuke either.
No, but I'm saying the other person on the other end of the phone, that's another human being. The only concern that I have about the hard takeoff scenario is that if a computer realizes what it can do, and it's that whole gaining agency, as long as it's a tool, it's going to do whatever the hell we tell it to. Mm-hmm. It can be a really, really fancy hammer, but it's still going to be a hammer. But if it ever has its own desires or interests and can figure out how to update itself, it can do it so fast that a human being wouldn't even know that it was happening. It's the kind of thing that's the concern that I have.
You don't worry about your Tesla taking off without you. Right?
No, and I don't think
Tesla could write the code so that it does it, right? It's not impossible that it could, that you could program it with a set of I think a thing that's tough when thinking about this stuff, there's a trap that people almost universally fall into, which is they're trying to imagine a smart thing, a thing that's really smart, that's smarter than them. And the only real framework we have for understanding smart is people smart, right? Because everything in your life that's smart is people, and we, think about, well, what if you had a really, really smart person and they were malicious? Like how terrible would that be? But humans are limited in smartness. Like the difference between the smartest person and the dumbest person isn't that large. What if the difference is 1,000? And that's where we end up in these really scary scenarios. But we're inadvertently anthropomorphizing the AI when we do that. And AI does not naturally have, desire to do anything any more than a backhoe does, or a drill or something like that. It gets a desire. It gets, its own volition. If you go to great lengths to give it to it, like that's not a natural outcome. So one of the things you want to avoid in avoiding the hard takeoff scenario is you want to avoid having people build AIs that do that. it's unlikely to be accidental and easy to do something like that. Right. It's much more likely to be a concerted effort by a lot of people with a bunch of resources to build such a machine. And you'd have to be an idiot, right? Because it's not like building a nuke. But because you're just asking for it. Like you can't be smart enough to build this machine and dumb enough to not understand the consequences if you do. Like it's not going to turn out well for you, right? If you do this. So that's one of the reasons why I think you won't see people doing it. And by the time it's easy to do it, there will be lots of really powerful AIs in the world that are appropriately slaved to human beings, that are actually doing what we want. And those become a powerful way of preventing the consequences of one of these other machines getting out. You build a bunch of big AIs whose job is to keep an eye out for malicious AIs, right? That I feel like the scenario where AI is really, really safe is a scenario where there are millions and millions and millions of really powerful AIs. So we have a society of AIs, and AIs act as human agents. There's a story I thought was really interesting. I don't know if this is true. Like it's related by somebody who was involved. So, take it with a grain of salt. But there's a guy, he builds an AI. He's using ChatGPT to basically solve various annoying problems for people that have to do with paperwork in the real world. I think that it's just he used to run a website called Do Not Pay. And it was a way of just getting out of parking tickets, right? Yeah. You'd go fill out the stuff about your parking ticket and it would file all the paperwork with the city, to contest the parking ticket. And most cities are just we're not going to fight this. It's not worth it. So they just drop your ticket. And so he had this website that was a way to get out of parking tickets. So he has really taken to ChatGPT and he's been trying to use it to do similar kinds of things. So one of the things he came up with is having ChatGPT, right? If you want to cancel your cable, if you want to cancel cable service with, some cable company or something like that, you go online nowadays, you don't talk to them, you got a little chat window in a browser, right? And you chat with the person, you say, I want to cancel my service. And they say, oh, you don't want to cancel your service. We'll give you this channel. We'll give you this other stuff. And you're like, no, I really don't want to cancel. And then they say, well, what if we drop the price 20%, 30% or whatnot? Right, so now it turns into this negotiation, what price can you get your cable at? So he built a ChatGPT bot to do this, so that you can just go to your cable company, you're like, here, negotiate with the cable company, right? To give me a lower price. And it was doing pretty good. His claim is it was getting people 30% off their cable bill. You just go to the website, plug this thing in, and you get cheaper cable or whatever. And then a funny thing happened on the way to the bank. Cable companies apparently are also using ChatGPT to do customer service. So he related this event where his AI is negotiating with an AI, they're both these ChatGPT driven models to get the price down, right? Okay. Right. So why is this anecdote interesting? Well, it's funny, right? It's funny that we live in a world where one AI is fighting with another AI to get you a better deal or a worse deal, both of them are. But the thing is, take a step back. These are two AIs acting as agents for different entities that are trying to figure out the best way to be together in the world, to negotiate something, right? So the thing about the reason people want to use ChatGPT to do this kind of stuff instead of doing your own is because, first of all, it could be a lot better at it. You have a script, it's specialized to getting you the best deal. It knows when to give, when to take, what offers, what a reasonable offer is. So it's a good negotiator that specializes the system. And similarly on the cable company side, they also have a good negotiator between the two. So instead of having a human being go through this thing that's maybe laborious and uncomfortable that they might not be very good at, we have an AI acting as their agent. And it's not, move forward 5 or 10 years, the US is negotiating with China an arms treaty. China puts out their AI, which, it's easy to think of this as a simple hack. But one of the things that you can do with an AI that's tough for a human being, it's hard for a human being to represent the whole spectrum of interested parties on their side of the ocean. Right? Because there's so many people, they want so many different things. They've said, it's just the landscape of give and take within a single country is super complicated. So coming up with a treaty with another country, which is the optimum balance between all the trade-offs for all the people, it's really hard. But you could do that with an AI because it's got that big context window, right? And you can train it especially for this particular application. So that's an interesting, it's not really Pollyannish. I think it's a realistic scenario. We will use AIs as negotiating agents in situations where it's very hard for a human being or even a team of human beings to engage in a negotiation.
Right. Well, I agree. I suddenly just thought that we should have a mediator bot too, that, China and the US want to negotiate a nuclear arms treaty, and there should be a bot that's like a neutral bot that just has a context for everything. That's the mediator. But for a much more localized thing, just take something like, I just found out that I had tickets to go to Austin, to go to the shareholders day meeting. And immediately that required me to go online, find airplane tickets, find a hotel, find a rental car. How much nicer would it be if I could just tell my agent to go negotiate with Hertz's agent and Delta's agent and whatever it was, Quality Inn's agent, and it just went out there and it found out the best deals and it negotiated and it just came back and said, here's your package. So it becomes a travel agent that used to exist, that was a human being. Now we've come full circle, but it's just a bot, but that bot's talking to all of their bots.
Yeah. So, and it's better. And it's not just cheap, it's better than you would be at it, right? Because it's specialized to doing that. Yeah, like people have already built these bots. They're not quite as sophisticated as the full-on negotiator thing that we're talking about, but people have already essentially built scripts around ChatGPT to basically have it go do wedding planning, right? And it you say, I want a wedding in Napa for this many people at a place that's good for kids. I mean, there's literally a story of a guy doing this.
Oh yeah, that's Langchain.
Yeah, and then he went and had the event, right? Like he actually booked all the places and went and did the thing because he got a good result out of it.
Yeah,
like that, and once again, that was impossible 2 months ago. I mean, just not possible, right? And now it's been done, and there are 100 or 1,000 other people doing this at the same time, and we're going to see the fruit of all that work over the next few months.
Right. I went on God mode because I was like, well, I'd be interested in getting a better camera for myself and things like that. And I said, I don't know if you know God mode. It's Langchain. It's Auto GPT, but it's packaged up in a website. And I just said, I have this budget and I want the best camera for YouTube videos, live videos, and the best lens for a portrait lens. And it just went through all of these steps, researched the websites, did all these things, and came back with a recommendation. Now, it did get a little derailed. It's not perfect yet by any means, but it's like within another 6 months, it's going to be pretty damn good. I'll probably be
Google just announced that as a product yesterday.
Yeah.
So you're going to go to the Google website, and there's the top bar, which now is just the Google search bar or whatnot. Right. And when you get your results, the top of it is ads, and then you get the real results before. So they're going to switch that around. So the top of it is like an AI interpreting your question and giving stuff. So like when you go to the AI and you say, I need a vacation destination where I can take my kids over spring break, and this is my budget, and blah, 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 blah. And it'll break it down for you and give you a chance to drill down into it and have the AI do that. So yeah, there are small entities will do this, but then Google will also do it. And it'll be rough going in the beginning, but once they get going, it's going to be nice.
I just we're still trying to figure it. I think the ultimate thing for me, because it's so stressful planning these things with so many different inputs, you got your family, and to someday have an agent that you're just like, here's the parameters of what we want. And it goes off, and in 15 minutes or an hour, it comes back and it says, here's the whole package. Do you want to buy it? And
20
you're like,
seconds.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, 20 seconds. I mean, maybe it'll take 20 seconds, but but whatever
20 seconds.
It's like, well, that actually changes the whole game too, because if it's 20 seconds, you could go like, give me one in Europe, one in South America, one in...
You don't even have to do that. You can just tell it those are your... And actually, longer term, the agent becomes customized to you.
Yes,
the agent, you use it. It knows what your budget is. It knows what you like. It knows the last 5 vacations. It knows how old your kids are and the games that they like and the places they like and which one can't stand sunscreen and which one really wants to not go someplace where you can't watch football on the weekends or whatever. They'll just bolt all that together for you. Like customize. In the long run, the agents get customized.
That is true. That's the big thing. Maybe that's the biggest change that's going to happen. It's already starting to happen, but maybe that's even bigger than anything else, is the customizability. Because currently, every time you go on, ChatGPT or any of these things, it's sort of like a fresh start. And it's really generally knowledgeable, but it doesn't know John or James. It's like, but someday, if it's like
such
your family butler, So,
yeah, the customization, it'll come really quickly. We'll see that happen soon. Like all the stuff that we're talking about, this is not like sci-fi stuff. Like it'll be here in a year, 6 months, something like that. Like really soon, you're going to see these things popping as products, and there will be no shortage of entities that will be happy to provide you with this stuff for free and then just take their cut off the back end. Right.
All right. So here's the finishing thought. If we have this conversation in May of 2024, do you think that we'll be able to have virtual James, AI James talking to AI John, and we can just sit back and watch the conversation happen or not?
Man, that's an interesting thing to think about. I thought about just for jollies building an avatar for like doing YouTube videos. I thought that would be fun. But like, I don't know, I got other things I want to do, but like you can do it now. People have already like built like little avatars of themselves. Grimes has this whole thing that she's going off and doing where she's building like a Grimes bot, and people can use it to make music or whatever the deal is. And she's going to have this clone that she uses for doing all the things that she doesn't want to do. Yeah. And it's a clever idea, and it's cool that somebody's out there doing this in a really public way. Right. So just sort of educate the rest of us about what the possibilities are by being a pioneer.
Okay. So it's a possibility. So in a year, maybe we'll have our avatars talk to each other.
6 months from now, somebody could release a package, where it's one click. Hey, put your photo album in, put in a couple of videos, give it 2 years worth of email, right? And just like, boing, here's my clone, right? Oh, you need some voice samples and stuff too, right?
There we go. Well, hopefully, I'm sure we'll talk before then, but let's see what happens. I want to make a date for May of 2024, and let's see where things are. Who the heck knows? All right. Thank you, James, so much for talking to me. I mean, it's been a long and very involved and very wide-ranging conversation, and I've been waiting a long time to talk to you, so I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Do the like and subscribe and all that stuff, and definitely follow James on Twitter. He's amazing. Bye-bye.